Well, look who's here. Good morning.
Good morning, Carolyn.
Oh, it's so nice to see you, Dr. Rosensweet. Really, welcome back.
Thank you.
We missed you. We did. And certainly I did. And I know I got some nice Dr. Rosensweet compliments. Uh-oh, switcheroo. I always love that. And then the cat will come up and then we'll get started. We'll be all good. Question number one comes in. You and I speak a lot about breast cancer. We do. It just comes up all the time. You have brought up pulmonary, tell me if I'm saying this right, embolus or pulmonary embolisms. Either
They're both.
or? Yeah. A woman presents, she is a 66-year-old woman, retired ER nurse, so she knows a bit or two, a thing or two about medicine. She had a pulmonary embolism 4 years ago, and she's attributing this to self medicating with, good morning, with taking an inordinate amount of cranberry pills due to a UTI that she had, urinary tract infection, which then involved a lot of vitamin K. She's quite well now, thankfully, but the doctors, bam, took her off of hormones immediately that she had been taking for quite some time. Fast forward, through her cardiologist, pulmonary doctor, she's tested clean, no clotting disorders or anything like that. However, nobody is going to touch her with a hormone. She did find someone in a place very close to a place called Sarasota, Florida, oddly. And she really wants to cut to the chase here. She's like, is it worth my time? Am I just going to be told, no, you can never take hormones again because you had this happen? Um, she's miserable. She's going through every single symptom as happens. And she respects you and wanted to know kind of like what you thought about this, if you could.
Yeah. There's several moving parts to this question.
Mm-hmm.
One is they took her off of hormones, and that relates to pulmonary embolism. And this dates back to what we learned with the birth control pill, that a certain small percentage of women who went on the birth control pill developed a clot in their legs. And a smaller percentage of those women who developed that clot, that's called thrombophlebitis, small percentage of those women, that clot broke loose and went to the lungs, blocked off part of the lungs, and that can be life-threatening.
Yeah.
And that happened, and what that's been traced down to is oral estrogen, taking estrogen by mouth. In order to get sufficient body levels of estrogen when you take it by mouth, because it has to go through the digestive system, and when it leaves the stomach and goes to the small intestine, it then travels directly to the liver, any hormone that you take by mouth. And because they're fat soluble, they go directly to the liver and they get biochemically processed in the liver. And 80 to 90% of what you swallow gets immediately biochemically processed in the liver, leaving about 10 to 20% that makes it through the liver unscathed and gets distributed to the whole body to function as a hormone. Well, in order to get adequate amounts of the steroid hormones through that liver, when you're only delivering about 10 to 20% of them, you have to give higher doses.
Right.
And the 80%, the 90% that gets immediately processed in the liver also happens to be provocative to the liver. And the liver can produce an increased amount of inflammatory proteins that relate to inflammation. And it can also produce an increased amount of coagulation proteins. So when you swallow estradiol by mouth, you wind up, for some women, increasing the amount of coagulation proteins, thus the propensity to coagulate your blood. And for a small number of women, but significant, that can cause a blood clot. Now that's with oral estrogen. So that's one thing. That's why her doctors were so intense about not prescribing her hormones. But they hadn't really received the information that this was from the birth control pill, from oral estrogen, and was not found with topical estrogens. And all this has been published. The topical does not cause that increase in coagulation. Topical estrogen does not increase that increase in coagulation propensity, whereas oral can. But they all got blurred together. So anyone who's heard about, we're most familiar with what's most prevalent. And it takes really burrowing in and becoming an expert on the subject to realize there's a difference between topical and oral. That's part one. Part 0, which should have preceded part 1, is this nurse states something about cranberry juice and taking a large amount of it. And, it's a very popular remedy for urinary tract infections.
It's actually cranberry pills.
Yeah, I've suggested this myself. I never really got a handle on whether it was capable of doing the job, but certainly tried it out. And she's making a statement that I myself cannot comment on because I'm not knowledgeable enough. And it's whether cranberry juice contains or creates so much vitamin K that coagulation gets increased by increasing the amount of vitamin K, which if vitamin K increases, you can get an increased propensity to clot. I want to back her up because I can't be 100% certain that that's what did it.
Yeah.
And that she wants to take it that lightly. And I would not take it that lightly. But it does not matter, because there's one thing that's important right now, only one thing that's important, is does she have an increased propensity to coagulate her blood right now? Well, if you're an American, we have an increased propensity to clot our blood. And that means it clots easier than it should be. Like, the clotting mechanism is very delicately balanced. We don't want to clot too easily, or we'll get clots in our vessels. But we don't want to bleed too easily, because if we get bit by a saber-toothed tiger, we're going to bleed out. We want to be able to clot if we get a saber-toothed tiger bite. So it's very delicately balanced. Well, it turns out Americans are on the more likely to coagulate end of things. And we've been pushed there, so to speak, by health issues. Our immune systems aren't as strong as they ought to be. We put our immune system under many challenges. And the dance that we do with the germ population of this planet, because we're in delicate balance with the germ population. We got 3.5 pounds of bacteria in our intestinal tract. We got viruses galore all over the place, every orifice, all over our skin. But we're in delicate balance. Our immune system holds them back. And we're in wonderful synergistic relationship with them, unless it gets out of whack. And there's a tendency for it to get out of whack, where our vitality isn't what it ought to be to fire up an immune system to what it should be to hold back the viral population or be in better balance with it. Well, it turns out that the coagulation mechanism is one of the most primitive ways we fight viruses. We throw a clot around them. And I know I'm going very, very deep into the weeds. But the bottom line is we're already set up as Americans to coagulate a little too easily. That's why there's so much heart attack and stroke. It's one of the reasons we coagulate a little too easily. Moral of the story, lead a lifestyle which you're addressing that particular issue. It's so subtle that most of us never know it, and it's never of consequence. But in some people, it's not so subtle, and it can lead to a mysterious stroke or a mysterious heart attack. Never sick a day in his life. Blood clot in the heart, dies.
40 years old, tennis court.
Yeah.
Right?
So when I hear and this is what it comes down to. This beloved nurse who's been on the front lines,
Oh, yeah.
emergency rooms, I know this, my own version of this, because when I was supporting my early holistic medical doctor habit, I had to do
Habit.
I had to do supplementary work, and emergency rooms was one of them to pay my bills. And oh my God, it can be like a war zone there.
Oh, yeah.
So I have utter respect and honoring of this woman. My God,
Yeah.
the service she's done and what she's faced, very few human beings can understand. And that's just a side comment. The main comment is her main job is to find someone who's really good at hormones. That's where it begins. And is open-minded and is, familiar with like, for example, in our training program, which is 12 hours long, just the initial educational portion is 12 hours long. There's a big section on coagulation because this issue has been seen before.
Right.
And so whenever someone squeaks of having a possible coagulation issue, we just do this, just take the steps. We evaluate whether they have an increased propensity to coagulate or not. So cranberry juice or not, she's told me enough of a story that I want to assess her coagulation mechanism, which can be done by a blood test. The issue is it's expensive.
She apparently has done this, and she's coming out clean every year.
Well, the thing that we don't know is what was tested.
Ah, okay.
Because I've been in communication for years with an expert at LabCorp, one of the major laboratories that does this work. And we're trying to come up with a panel adequate enough to assess the many, many, many moving parts to the coagulation mechanism, thus many, many moving parts to be tested, balancing that with the cost of that test. And as much effort and time as I put into it, we're still a work in progress. Right now, we're at about $1,700. Where with I not being an expert in coag, if we get negatives on these many things that are tested on the $1,700 test, I feel like this woman does not have an increased propensity to coagulate, and we just go ahead and treat her with topical estrogen. Now, I have for a long time, suspected that there's a less expensive way to test, and that a hematologist who is deeply familiar with coag would be able to design that blood test and be able to do a consultation with this patient and be able to say, yeah, she's got an increased propensity to coagulate. I see it in her testing. Or they'd be able to say, nope, this woman is clear to walk about the cabin here. And they could do so through their expertise. So here's step number one, really. Go to a hematologist who specializes in coagulation evaluation and get a consultation and learn whether she's got an increased propensity to coagulate or not. Anyone who's ever had a stroke should have that workup. she may have had that workup, but without knowing the details and without running it by an expert, I wouldn't know what to say, just on this show. The thing is, a hematologist who's familiar with coags got to give her the all systems go. Now, if that hematologist comes up with, oh no, she's got an increased propensity to coagulate, well, there's many, many tools to reduce the increased propensity to coagulate. That's the great news. There's some
Yeah.
people you give them too much vitamin C, you can't give someone too much vitamin C really, or a lot of vitamin E, or a lot of omega-3 fish oils, they're going to reduce their ability to coagulate to the point where they're going to bruise on the back of their hands because they're bleeding too easily and they're not clotting well enough. So a lot of this can be accomplished just through nutritional supplements. If you see an increased propensity to clot, you can address the increased propensity to clot many times just with supplements, including lumbrokinase or Baluch. You can look that up. Now, if you can't achieve it with that way, you can achieve it with medications. My God, you could even take heparin, injectable, but you don't have to go that far. There's Coumadin. And yes, I know people are concerned about Coumadin, but you do what you need to do because stroke is a big deal.
Ooh.
And she's demonstrated that she can have a stroke. Therefore, we want to go the full 9 yards to be able to say to her with reassurance, look, we've covered your basic issue here. Now let's talk about hormones. Now, having said that, the literature and experience is totally clear about that it's topical that is safe, whereas oral estrogen will provoke coagulation. Wouldn't you know, 30 years doing this with women, I have 2 exceptions, Nancy and Denise. Why do I remember their names, even though I haven't seen them for about 25 years? Because I remember them, each of them at different occasions said to me, gee, I've started on these hormones and I'm getting a pain in my leg like when I was on the birth control pill and I got a clot. And Nancy had a pulmonary embolus. So you never say never. Now, we went ahead and did a whole bunch of stuff to check it out, and it turned out with Nancy and Denise that it wasn't the hormones were not causing, and the discomfort in their legs went away. So we were eventually be able to treat them. But you never say never in medicine. You never say, oh, you're 100% free and clear. No, that does not occur in the world of human beings. And I know this was quite a, extensive answer and complex answer. The bottom line, if she gets clearance from a hematologist, and even if she is procoagulant, meaning she could coagulate too easy, you do what you need to do to make you not procoagulant. And then you go on hormones and you retest. That's why I brought up Denise and Nancy. You go on the hormones and then you retest the coagulation mechanism. And if the hormones did not promote increased coagulation, she's free to walk about the cabin. So you just take steps. Now, it might sound complex, but the bottom line is she's got to go shopping. She's got to confirm that the hematologist that gave her the clearance, but what I heard, and maybe I misheard this, is that hematologist did not say it's safe to take hormones. So I don't know that she went to the hematologist as an expert in coagulation, or that the hematologist was not up on the difference between topical and oral estrogen. So
Yeah.
that's what you do. The main task is finding someone who really knows what they're doing. Hematologist expertise is usually in the world of blood cancers and stuff like that. Thank God someone's an expert at that. Very, very important. I don't know what percentage of hematologists are also expert in evaluating the coag mechanism, along with knowing that the distinction between oral versus topical estrogen.
She is a pretty cut to the chase woman and just lovely. And so I think really her major question, and I think that you've answered this well, is is it all lost for me? Like, should I just, is it a wrap? Like, should I just give this up and not even pursue it?
No, 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 no way. That's the that's what it comes down to, doesn't it?
Yep.
No. Um, it seems problematic because she's venturing out into the world of hormones where rumor has hurt the world of hormones terribly. So she's up against what the fear that was induced in the world public by false information and by not understanding the depth of what's required here. So that's the world we're born into. I'm used to that. I realized since I was a teenager that there's a certain level of unconsciousness that prevails on this planet, and it's severe. And I made a decision rather than to get bent out of shape by it every time I encounter it. All you got to do is turn on the news. If you want to get bent out of shape, I made a decision long ago that the earth and the human consciousness has always been compromised, and it's getting better. There's millions and millions of people who care about being more golden rule and being more beneficial, and they're basically great people. Unfortunately, they don't hold the reins of power yet.
Yet.
I have high hopes that that the growth, the spiritual growth that has taken place in millions and millions of Americans alone, individuals, is going to prevail. But I want to navigate in the world I was born into. And yes, that unconsciousness exists. And I choose not to get bent out of shape by it and just deal with what we have to deal with and succeed with what we have to deal with. And so, bottom line for this wonderful, I say that because I have such compassion for anyone who's been an emergency room nurse.
Oh,
So
yeah.
this wonderful nurse is, yeah, this is the world we're born into. Yeah, there's some obstacles. She's faced a few obstacles in that emergency room, I can tell you that.
Yeah.
And it all boils down to the job of getting a hematologist that's willing to give her clearance that her coag is fine, or treat her if it isn't until it is fine, and then get a hormone specialist who knows the distinction between oral and topical estrogen and gives her topical estrogen. And then if there's any question whatsoever, once she's on the topical estrogen, she gets tested for coagulation to make sure she's not provoking her coag mechanism. Those are the 3 steps. Now, as someone, when you're a nurse in an emergency room, the level of complexity that you deal with is staggering.
You're pretty much in fight or flight the whole.
Well, I'm not saying that. There's so many different things to know, and so when you run into an experienced emergency room nurse, it's really remarkable what they've learned and how they learn how to deal with things. And so in the emergency room, she's totally at home. She could probably take on emergencies that would make someone's hair fall out who had never done it before.
Right.
Who just spent it. No, to her, it'd be very routine. Well, what she's describing is very routine in my world. And it's not a big deal. But the big deal is going shopping for a hematologist and a hormone specialist who really knows what they're doing. And then it's straightforward. It's not hard. That's the thing I really want to say to her. Yes, if she goes out there and she meets someone who's not knowledgeable, it's going to feel hard. She's going to get a lot of pushback because that's not their field of expertise. But if she runs into one hematologist and one hormone specialist that really knows their stuff, it's totally routine. It's like someone coming in an auto accident. Yeah, there's stuff, but you figure it out. You just do what you need to do. You just take the steps. And it's not like an auto accident even. It's not that urgent or scary. So that's her job. That's her job, is to go out and find a hematologist that she can trust, who really understands coag, and to find a hormone specialist that understands the difference between topical and knows how to monitor. That's the thing I really want to impart. Although it seems complex to her, it is not. complex to someone who spends their time in the world of assessing coagulation and someone who spends their professional time in the world of hormones. It's a piece of cake. It's routine stuff. You just take some steps and you come out the other side and you're good. Your wash is clean. You know what I thought of doing, Carolyn?
Hmm.
Is there's people who actually show up to this Facebook Live, and I'm thinking, why don't we take a few questions because they. So how about if we take some from the chat?
Sure. You know me. I can't get to the bottom. And I'm seeing what
To
I'm
start with,
seeing.
can you go to the top?
Of course. Well, um, I believe it's Vivi. Um, she had written something below, but at the very top, she said, because of severe endometriosis, I had an emergency hysterectomy at 34. I'm 46 now, and I have been suffering the symptoms. Oh, don't I know? I have been suffering the symptoms of menopause for years. I'm losing muscle mass, and I need help.
Yeah. Um,
Been there.
there, she has the exact same job.
Yep.
The having the hysterectomy, and what Vivi didn't say is whether they also took her ovaries or not, but it doesn't.
Um, Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know. I have another question here that, yeah.
Um,
I
but it
have a
doesn't.
feeling she did.
46
It's down
doesn't
at the
matter.
bottom.
Vivi has the same job. It's to find someone who's good at hormones and to get treated. Endometriosis, yeah, it's an issue. And in menopause, it's unlikely that there's endometriomas left behind, though there could be. But you just start treating. And it's unlikely that you're going to activate that endometrioma if it's still there. But if you do, you have to take the next steps. And sometimes that involves a gynecologist. Sometimes it involves laparoscopy to remove the remaining endometriomas. But your situation, Vivi, is extremely routine to deal with. You may think because you had your hysterectomy and no ovary, if a woman doesn't tell me she has a hysterectomy or removal of the ovaries, but she just is in menopause and she's reporting the common menopausal symptoms, I can't tell the difference and it doesn't matter. Both women are treated the same. You start on an individual process in which there's a thorough evaluation done by history, and then that helps us zero in on how to begin treating you. And we start with low doses of 3 different hormones, actually 4, but we combine and we start you with low doses of estrogen in the form of bias. We start you with low doses of progesterone. Both of these are topical, and we start you with a low dose of a combination of testosterone and DHEA. You losing muscle, it's testosterone and DHEA that really matters. So we start you with all 3. We gradually increase. And what I highly encourage you to do is to go to Carolyn's Ins and Outs of Menopause and download the PDF version of the book, Happy Healthy Hormones. We describe this process in great thoroughness. I wrote it for women so you can have an understanding if you want to. It's handy to work with. It's always handy for me when I've worked with a woman who's read the book and we just partner figuring out the ideal dosages and balances, and then we test. But
I
it's not
will put
necessary.
it up again on the group right up at the top. So it's the
Great.
ins and outs of menopause with David Rosensweet, MD, and you can just look at it, download it, the PDF version, and read it because it's good. Thank you. Go ahead.
But that's not the main job. If your main job is to find someone who is really interested in treating women in menopause with compounded bioidentical hormones and is good at it. That's the job Vivi really has, because to them it'll be a piece of cake if they have education and experience. Doesn't matter about your past. And should you have an endometrioma left behind that happens to be activated, I doubt that it is, because if an ovary was left behind at the age of 34 and you had endometriosis trouble left behind, my guess is it would have been activated already. So my guess is you're going to be fine and you're going to be
Well,
routine. It'll seem like routine. How can I be routine? I've had all this past. Well, no, your past accomplished for you the refining of your soul that was
oh,
involved in that healing process. And
absolutely.
you could have a routine time. Go out and replenish those hormones. There is something in Arizona, and if you contact, yeah, there is someone in Arizona. There's a great one in Arizona. And if you contact Sherry, Sheree, at menopausemethod.com, there's two people in Arizona. I'll put this in the chat.
Thank you. Dr. Rosensweet trains and mentors doctors, and so yeah. Oh, good, good.
So there's two providers we know that we've trained in Arizona, and you can do everything you need for menopause via telemedicine, providing you have a
Right,
primary care provider.
right, right. And it's so easy. It's wonderful. Thank you for both of those answers. And I apologize that I don't know why my computer will not let me get further down. There is one question I want to ask you, Dr. Rosensweet. And then, yes, please. And you can always reach out to me. Always reach out to me and I'll hook you up with Sherry for sure. Um, this question comes in, and I want to ask it. It's confusing for a lot of us. The question is, what is the best way to handle the progesterone steal? And why does this happen? But I'm going to further say cortisol steal, pregnenolone steal, any of the steals. They get stolen. And a lot of us don't understand what the heck that means, how it happens, why it happens, and what we can do about it. How's that for a question?
It's a good one.
Yeah,
I've heard this term for 30 years,
short amount of time.
and I wonder who's talking about it and what they've been told about and why they're concerned about it. What it's about is if you look at a biochemical pathway chart, how hormones are actually manufactured in your body, you see theory happening. And yeah, cool. But how's it really playing out? That's why you see my skepticism about this wonderful. Someone gave the language. It's really cortisol steal,
Yes,
and I haven't heard of a progesterone steal, and I have heard of a pregnenolone steal.
yes.
You get a fancy, fun sounding term like that, and you think, "Oh my God, I better not have that." Well, I don't know. I don't know if I've seen that very often, but here's what it's like. These hormones are all produced in your body from what you eat. And they all are produced out of cholesterol, interestingly enough. In fact, one of the complications of the cholesterol lowering drugs is the cholesterol gets too low and you don't produce these very critical for life hormones, and you get the consequences of that. It's not common for someone to be that overdosed on a cholesterol lowering drug. But my point is, they're all made out of cholesterol. So why don't you just eat more butter?
A
No,
stick a
no, I do
day.
not recommend this. I do not recommend this as a strategy. You have no control over where that butter is going to go.
Right.
Maybe some of the cholesterol in that butter is going to go to hormone production, and maybe a lot of it's going to go to your abdomen and your thighs and your butt. So I'm not recommending it. So cholesterol gets converted to a biochemical called pregnenolone. Pregnenolone has some activity. Pregnenolone gets converted to progesterone, and progesterone can get converted to cortisol. And so if you look at one of these biochemical pathways, you can see that if the body has increased need for cortisol, it could steal the progesterone away from the female pathways and use it to convert it to cortisol. And it is true that the body definitely prioritizes fight or flight, and cortisol is at the vanguard of fight or flight. And it is true that if you got too much fight or flight going on, as is epidemic on the planet Earth, people having not entirely functional responses to the stress of life, getting the medical diagnosis of, here's the medical diagnosis, getting bent out of shape too easily. String all those words together, one, as you do an email and you got the diagnosis, getting bent out of shape too easily. Just having a dysfunctional response to the stress, you're going to trigger the biology of fight or flight as if you had been attacked by a saber-toothed tiger. Well, that puts a very high demand on cortisol. And your body is going to take the resources it has to produce these steroid hormones and prioritize the production of cortisol. So you don't get as much progesterone, you don't get as much estrogen, you don't get as much testosterone. They're all shunted in one way or another down the stress pathway.
Would that be known as the steal?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your stress response is stealing away the hormones that you would ordinarily need for proper female function, proper mental function. You got to have progesterone to have the proper amount of calm. If you lose your progesterone, you can get anxiety just biologically. So I'm purposely avoiding going into further detail in the biochemical pathway because you can get lost in there and you can come up with thoughts that are just going to throw you off. The bottom line is this: devote your life, part of your life, to acquiring the information, tools, and support to deal excellently with life. And there's the living part, and then there's the expression of old emotional and mental constructs that aren't who you really are, isn't what life really is, but is very distressing. So one way to look at it is someone who's had a really rough childhood and has gotten abused. Well, when they grow up, they could enter a relationship, a new relationship, with a tremendous amount of fear that if they get close, they're going to get abused. If they love, they open their heart, they're going to get abused. They're going to be rejected. That's a very powerful experience. And it can screw up many relationships. And it calls for something. Acquiring the information, tools, and support to deal with the repressed emotions and thoughts that mess up your ability to be present in the actual new relationship so that you don't repeat the rejection and the loss that occurred when you were a child. There's pain, there's emotional pain, there's fear, there's sadness, there's anger, there's shame, there's guilt bottled up in the body and in the heart and in the soul. And part of our journey on earth is to unearth all this stuff and heal it. And that's why I said if you acquire the information, tools, and support, this is all healable. And it's part of
Right.
what life on earth is about. It's why you came to earth, was to heal this stuff so you can be happier and love and experience the beauty and miracles of what life really is. These things interfere with that. And this is accessible to everybody. Alcoholics Anonymous is done a tremendous amount of good work. Therapists, I have always thought we need an army of therapists to help all of us heal. There's really good therapists out there that can really help you with this emotional and mental content that needs to be unearthed and brought up and accepted.
It's an art in
On
and
the
of
line.
itself, truly.
And if you don't do that, what ordinarily would be, wow, this is a challenging situation. Let me at it. I can do this. Turns into, oh my God, I'm getting triggered for all the stuff that I didn't ever heal. And I don't even know what's going on, but I feel awful and I'm having this dramatic emotional response. Well, that's identical biologically to being attacked by a saber-toothed tiger.
Right.
And
Right.
you're gonna need some adrenaline and cortisol. And your body's gonna shunt the resources to produce the increased adrenaline and cortisol that you're demanding. And yeah, it's gonna recruit other hormones. It's gonna recruit testosterone in women because that's energizing. It's gonna recruit estrogens in women because those are energizing. It's going to recruit progesterone to produce more cortisol through the cortisol steal. No,
Right.
I get fancy about it. It comes down to the exact same thing. If you're having periods trouble, irregularities, because your progesterone you're not ovulating properly, you're being stressed most likely. And so you've got to do the great work too. Every human being on earth needs to embrace and become excellent at the great work, which is the healing of the emotions and the mind. Becoming conscious of and having tools to accept and unconditionally love exactly what's going on in your own self. This is the short version, but let's get away from these fancy biochemical diversions called the progesterone steal, which I had never heard of, but the cortisol stealing progesterone, and get down to what needs to be done. It calls for the same thing. Acquire information, tools, and support to heal your emotions, your mind, and your life. That's the great work. If you have the intention and the courage and the commitment to do that, you're going to create the information and tools and support. They're going to come flying into your lap. And you go, well, look at that. I got a buzzer on my phone that told me to go visit this website called Healing the Emotions. The teachers will come. You create the space and they will come. So that's what is really at the bottom of it. And I don't mean to diminish the fascination that the questioner has in biochemistry. I myself am totally fascinated by the biochemistry. But let's break it down to what it calls for. Acquiring the information, tools, and support to heal the emotions, mind, and if you do that, you're gonna keep coming home to the truth of who you are and the life itself. And life is really good for health. Living is really good for health.
Absolutely.
One of the main medicines.
That's put so well. I love it. Thank you, Dr. Rosensweet, truly. Um, oh my. So, ugh. Okay, are Dutch tests as accurate as blood for hormones?
This is a work in progress. We're now doing samples, splitting specimens for an individual patient, we're sending a lab, some urine off to Dutch, some off to the 24-hour urine hormone test. We're sending it off to blood tests, to salivary tests. We have a study. The menopause method is conducting a study to really come up with the science. I can tell you what I love and trust as far as when I'm treating a woman in menopause with hormones. I love and trust one test at this point. It's the 24-hour urine hormone test. That's what I love and trust. And I have a high level of interest in the subject. I'm talking to world experts. We've just acquired another world expert on our medical board on hormone testing, an
Nice.
MD PhD who owned and ran a hormone testing lab. So when we're ready to present the data, we will. But I can tell you at this point, what I love and trust is the 24-hour urine hormone test.
And that is not the Dutch test.
I'm just saying what I love and trust is the 24-hour urine hormone test, and I respect that the team behind the Dutch test cares and have scientific diligence and caring. But I can tell you right now that I'm going to stand by what I know, and that is the 24-hour urine hormone test is very valuable for treating women in menopause and men in andropause.
Thank you. Question comes in often. Is it possible to come off of estrogen blockers and start hormones right away?
This is a question that I need a heck of a lot more information. When I hear the word estrogen blockers, I'm going to make a guess that that woman has been put on estrogen blockers because of a prior history of breast cancer.
Yes.
So I can give you the general answer, and I don't ever mind repeating this. But I cannot answer this patient's specific question because in medicine, there's a ritual that is tried and true, and I was taught it in medical school, and I love it. And the first thing you do is you learn a lot about somebody, a lot of medical details. Like for the questionnaire we hand out to women, it takes about 45 minutes to an hour to fill it out. There's a lot of questions on there. It's called a medical history. And every physician on the planet has been trained in taking a good medical history. And the reason we take a good medical history is embedded within it are phenomenal clues about what's going on and where the next steps lie. Without that, I can't begin to answer this particular woman's question. But I want to go to the general.
Thank you.
Assuming that this woman had breast cancer, here's what I think is important to know about breast cancer. We are all vulnerable to thousands of medical diagnoses. A lot of them not, tough roads. We are all vulnerable to the possibility of getting hundreds of different cancers, some of them really tough. Since healing is possible, and there's never been something on earth, no matter how severe the diagnosis, that has not been healed, never give up hope. Because every diagnosis that's ever been, no matter what the reputation of the illness, some human being or multiple human beings have healed it. No matter how dire, come up with the most dire story you can imagine, and someone's healed it. And I've heard these dire stories, deathbed type stuff, now living a normal life. We're all subject to these diagnoses and these cancers. As a man, relatively speaking, I have an increased relative risk of developing prostate cancer than I do other cancers. There's reasons for that. I'm not going to go into the reasons right now, but they relate to what causes everything. And as a woman, women have an increased relative risk for developing breast cancer, and there's definite reasons why that's so. So here's how we develop cancer. Let's pretend that someone hired a videographer to take videos of your whole life from the time you were conceived 24/7 up until now, and that we projected this video on the wall behind me of your whole life 24/7, everything. Only to make it simpler, the editor of that video has a magic button, and they can delete all the good stuff, all the good food you ate, all the care you took of your body and your health, all the happiness and love and success that you had, all the appropriate emotional response you had to the conditions of your life, not exaggerated, all the toxicity that you avoided or detoxified from, all the proper exercise, all the good stuff. The editor pressed a button and it disappeared from the footage. That would shorten the amount of footage we'd be watching behind my shoulder here. Let's see, behind there. And what would be left behind would be all the indiscretions of nutrition, toxic exposure, inappropriate exercise, too much or too little, and all the exaggerated dysfunctional response to stress. Those are the 4 causes of all illness. And there'd be hundreds and hundreds of events on that video. There wouldn't be one. There'd be hundreds of breaches of good health creation. And then there's mysteries, things that go beyond our ability to understand. There's some things we don't understand. That's what causes illness. That's what causes cancer. Hormones do not cause cancer. Now, here's the science. Women who are treated with hormones are at less risk for breast cancer, heart attack, and stroke than women who are not treated with hormones. Women who have had breast cancer, now it's true that they have an increased relative risk of a cancer recurrence as opposed to a woman who's never had breast cancer getting breast cancer. But even with that increased possibility of recurrence, that woman is at less risk for recurrence if she's treated with hormones. And the hormones we're talking about, where the best science exists, is with Premarin and Prempro, something I've never prescribed. That's where the best science exists. And for anyone who's on an estrogen receptor site blocker, thus with a prior history of breast cancer, I urge you to become an expert at risk, and that you could elaborate and understand deep in your body and in your mind, to the extent that's satisfying to you, what the actual science is on risk. Because I made a statement there. A woman who's had breast cancer and had the breast cancer properly treated, usually according to an oncologist, if she is then treated with hormones, she's at less risk for recurrence than if she's not treated with hormones. That's the science. And I summarize that in chapter 3 of the book, Happy, Healthy Hormones, that you can download from Carolyn's Facebook page. And I'm referring you to a book by Dr. Avram Blooming and Carol Tavris. And Dr. Blooming is an oncologist who specializes in breast cancer. And there's the science. There it is. He lays it all out there.
Oh, man. And now. Yes.
And it's a piece of work to read it, but for someone who's concerned and wants to make a choice about what's right for her, and you've had breast cancer, you want to have that information so you can be confident that the choice you're making is the right choice. Maybe your choice is going to be, I don't want to be treated with hormones. Or maybe your choice is going to be, I want to be treated with hormones. But what's imperative is that you are knowledgeable enough that you know what the answer is for you. Now, are you going to be perfect? No, none of us are perfect. To make perfect choices is not possible. We're human, but you can get awfully darn close, and you can understand the science. And then your real task, once you become informed and you know in your guts what's right for you, is you find someone who's so familiar with literature that they're not afraid to treat you. And this gets complex because they're putting their license at risk because it doesn't matter what the science is. Oh my God, it doesn't matter what the science is. Because the prevailing opinion is everyone's still out there. Most people, physicians and women, are scared based on false science. So if a medical board is ever challenged by your relative, if you've passed away, that a medical board challenges the doctor or a jury challenges the doctor. So what we ask women who want to be treated who've had breast cancer is they write an informed consent out of their own heart and their own soul as part of the process. So with that, Carolyn, I must make an abrupt leave.
So we
So
only have another 6 days to wait to see you. And
so
I
I'm
will.
gonna sign off, and because I must.
Okay, that's
And
fine.
eh,
Thank you, thank you, thank you. As
you're welcome.
always, thank you everybody for coming up. We will talk to you later. We know you're very busy, so we appreciate your being here with us. Have a great day, Dr. Resident Sweet. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Carolyn. Same to you.
Always.